The alien sky above was an endless stretch of dark blue with only a few distant stars twinkling. The air in the arena was thick with tension as the crowd watched in anticipation. It had been years since a human had stepped into the arena, and even though they were far from the strongest species in the galaxy, a human was coming today to fight Lysara. The queen of the Zetheri sat high on her throne, her sharp eyes watching every movement below. The arena was a grand structure, built from ancient stone and bathed in the light of two suns. The spectators, a mixture of alien species, filled the stands, their faces a blend of excitement and curiosity. Today was going to be unlike anything they had ever seen before. Human was about to fight in their arena. A hush fell over the crowd. As the sound of boots hitting the dust echoed across the open space, in the distance, a small figure appeared at the entrance to the arena. It was Roderick, a human warrior from Earth, known for his strength and bravery in the human wars. His features were rugged, his eyes burning with determination, and his posture was confident. He wore simple clothing, a faded tunic and a worn leather belt, the long sword hanging at his side. Roderick's arrival was greeted with whispers, some in awe, some in disbelief. The Zetheri had never seen a human fight, let alone stand before them in their own arena. Lysara's heart beat a little faster as she studied the man. He looked so small compared to the other warriors who had fought here, and yet there was something about him that intrigued her as Roderick stepped into the center of the arena. The silence grew. His eyes scanned the surroundings, the towering alien spectators, and the gleaming stone beneath his feet. He didn't flinch at the eyes that followed his every move, nor did he look around for support. His focus remained on the task at hand, the battle that was about to begin. Lysara leaned forward in her throne, her breath caught in her chest. It was not the arrival of the human that had her on edge. It was the reason for his presence. The ancient law of the Zetheri stated that any champion who could defeat one of their finest warriors would be granted a prize beyond imagination. And it just so happened that Lysara's personal champion Calith stood at the opposite side of the arena, waiting for his opponent. Calith was a giant of a warrior, a being of immense strength and skill. His body was covered in scales that glinted in the light, and his eyes were a deep, glowing amber, like the burning heat of a distant star. His reputation as the fiercest fighter in the galaxy was well earned, and the thought of a human even attempting to challenge him seemed laughable to most. But Lysara had learned long ago not to underestimate anyone, and her instincts were rarely wrong. Roderick turned his head, locking eyes with Lysara. For a brief moment their gazes met, and Lysara felt a strange shiver run down her spine. Quickly shook it off, telling herself that it was just the tension of the moment. The crowd grew louder, and she could hear their murmurs. They didn't believe the human had a chance, but they were curious to see how this would play out. Calith let out a deep growl, stretching his massive arms above his head. The sound echoed through the arena, and the ground seemed to tremble. Beneath them, Roderick didn't flinch. He simply drew his sword from its sheath and held it steady in front of him. His eyes narrowed, and Lysara could see the calmness in his face. This was no ordinary man. The silence was broken by the booming voice of the arena announcer. The champion of the Zetheri, Calith, versus the challenger, Roderick of Earth. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Lysara's eyes remained focused on Roderick. She couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, though she couldn't understand why. This wasn't supposed to be a close fight. Calith charged first, his massive feet pounding the stone ground. He was fast, despite his size, and the sheer force of his movements sent dust flying in every direction. He swung his claws with deadly precision, aiming for Roderick's head. The crowd gasped. If the human was struck by that blow, it would be over in an instant. But Roderick was already moving. His body twisted and slid to the side, narrowly avoiding Calith's strike. The crowd gasped again, this time in shock. The human was faster than they expected. Lysara leaned forward, her heart racing. Roderick didn't seem afraid. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying the challenge. He raised his sword, preparing for his next move. The fight had only just begun, but Lysara could already sense that this battle would change everything. She could feel the tension building, the shift in the air. Roderick wasn't just fighting for victory. He was fighting for something more, something that no one in this arena could understand just yet. And that, more than anything, intrigued her. The moment Caliph lunged forward, the ground beneath his feet trembled, as if the very earth feared the force of his charge. His roar was deafening, a deep, guttural sound that shook the air. The crowd rose to their feet, their eyes wide with anticipation. Everyone expected a quick victory after all. Caliph was a creature of legend, a warrior whose strength was unmatched across the galaxy. Yet Roderick remained calm, his eyes locked on his opponent as if he were studying a puzzle rather than preparing for the fight of his life. Lysara, watching from her high throne, couldn't tear her gaze away from the human. There was something about the way he moved, something almost unnatural. As Caliph's massive claws swept through the air, Roderick didn't just dodge. He flowed like water, moving with an elegance that seemed out of place for someone who had just stepped into an arena meant for only the strongest beings in the universe. The audience gasped as Roderick rolled backward, narrowly missing the sweeping claws that would have torn him apart. His body hit the stone floor, but he was already on his feet again in a heartbeat, fluidly spinning his sword above his head. His movements were precise and calculated. His eyes locked onto Caliph, watching, waiting for the perfect moment. Caliph growled, frustration growing in his throat. This human was faster than he had ever imagined. He had expected to crush him with the first blow, but now the human was dodging him at every turn. The audience had fallen into stunned silence. No one had ever seen Caliph struggle before, as the battle raged on. Roderick's sword flashed like a streak of lightning, his blade a blur as it deflected each attack Caliph made. It was clear that Roderick wasn't just fighting to survive. He was testing his opponent, playing with him as though he were a child. And this angered Caliph even more. The alien champion roared again, his eyes burning with rage as he swung his massive fist toward Roderick's head. This time he feigned a blow to the left, but Roderick, always one step ahead, had already anticipated it. The human lunged forward, ducking beneath Caliph's strike and bringing his sword up in a sharp arc toward the alien's exposed side. Lysara's breath caught in her throat. She could see it, the perfect angle of attack. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The energy of the arena shifted, as though time itself was holding its breath. Caliph's massive form was momentarily vulnerable, and Roderick's blade was inches away from victory, but then something strange happened. Just as the sword was about to make contact with Caliph's side, the air seemed to warp. There was a flicker of movement, and in an instant, Roderick was knocked off his feet, sent sprawling across the arena floor. Lysara's eyes narrowed. She hadn't seen it, not at first. But then she realized Caliph hadn't just been fighting with his strength. He had been toying with Roderick, testing him, pushing him to his limits. The crowd erupted into a chorus of cheers and gasps, their eyes locked onto the fierce duel. Caliph's laughter boomed through the arena, a sound that was both triumphant and menacing. "You think you can defeat me, human?" he bellowed. "I am Caliph, the strongest warrior in the galaxy." But Roderick didn't respond with words. Instead, he pushed himself back up, wiping the blood from his lips. His eyes, though fierce, never wavered from the alien. He was no longer playing. It was clear now, he was in it to win. The battle had shifted. Now it was no longer about dodging and dancing around each other. Now it was a contest of wills. Caliph's brute strength against Roderick's incredible speed and resilience. Tension in the arena was palpable. No one could take their eyes off the fight, and even Lysara, the queen, felt a nervous flutter in her chest. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. If Roderick won, it would be a victory unlike any the Zethari had ever seen before. A human defeating the greatest champion of their kind would forever change the way their people viewed the galaxy. And yet, the queen couldn't help but wonder, was this really just a fight for survival? Or was something deeper at play here? As the two warriors locked eyes once again, Lysara's pulse quickened. She had seen warriors fight before, but never like this. The clash of swords and fists echoed through the arena, each blow sending shockwaves across the stands. Caliph roared in frustration as his blows grew more wild, more desperate. Roderick, on the other hand, remained as calm and composed as ever, his every move calculated and precise. He had found his rhythm, and now he was beginning to exploit Caliph's every weakness. The air was thick with the promise of something incredible. No one could tear their eyes away. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, it seemed as if the human had the upper hand. Lysera's mind raced. Could this be the end of her champion's reign? Could this human truly be the one to change everything? The queen's thoughts swirled as the fight continued, each strike bringing them closer to an unexpected conclusion. This section continues building the battle with suspense, action, and intrigue, while revealing the unexpected twist in the fight. It sets up a powerful dynamic between Roderick and Caliph, heightening the stakes for the remainder of the story. The arena was alive with noise, the crowd's roars, the clashing of weapons, and the cries of warriors. But for Lysera, the world seemed to slow. The battle in the center of the arena continued, but her mind had already moved far beyond the sounds of combat. She had witnessed countless fights, witnessed many champions fall, but this was different. This fight, this human, was different. Lysera could feel a tightness in her chest, a discomfort she hadn't experienced before. Her eyes flicked between the combatants, but she found it hard to focus. Every glance at Roderick sent an unfamiliar shiver through her, a feeling of something much larger at play than mere physical strength. Her gaze lingered on him a moment longer than she intended, and in that moment, she saw something, a flicker of power, a glimmer of victory in his eyes that unsettled her more than anything she had witnessed today. Roderick was not just fighting. To survive, he was playing a dangerous game. Every time he dodged Caliph's strikes or parried an attack, he looked as though he were leading his opponent deeper into a trap, luring the champion into overextending himself. The calmness in his eyes was unnerving. He knew something the others did not. He was not afraid, not of Caliph, not of the arena, and not of the ancient laws of the Zethari that dictated his fate should he win. But for Lysera, this was more than just the physical fight. It was her position, her throne, her authority that was at stake. She had never expected to be so affected by the outcome of a single battle. Yet here she was, sitting upon her high throne, her mind racing with possibilities. What if Roderick defeated Caliph? What if this human, this stranger from an unknown world, claimed victory in a way no one had ever imagined? He would be entitled to more than just the title of champion. According to the ancient laws of the Zethari, the victor could claim any prize they desired. And those in the arena had long believed it was reserved only for those who were their equals. Other Zethari, warriors, those of the same strength, the same blood. Never had it been foreseen that a human would have the same rights. The thought of it sent a chill down her spine. Lysera knew the law, and by it Roderick would be entitled to her. The queen of the Zethari, the one who had ruled for decades, who had commanded armies, who had held the fate of entire worlds in her hands, would be nothing more than a prize to be claimed. Her grip tightened on the armrest of her throne, her knuckles turning white. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath becoming shallow. This was not how she had imagined the day would unfold. She had expected Roderick to be defeated quickly, crushed under the might of Caliph. But now, she wasn't so. Sure, Caliph, the mighty champion, was starting to show signs of wear. The sweat on his brow glistened in the harsh light, his movements slowing as fatigue set in. His roars of frustration were becoming less frequent, replaced by sharp, ragged breaths. He was strong, yes, but Roderick had shown him a type of warfare that was foreign to him, one based not on strength, but on strategy. The human was outmatching him, outwitting him at every turn. Lysera's pulse quickened as Roderick lunged again, his sword cutting through the air with terrifying precision. It was as though he knew exactly where to strike, where to move, and where to wait. He was drawing closer to Caliph's defeat. It was inevitable now. But what would happen then? Roderick's victory would break the foundations of the Zethari. For centuries, they had prided themselves on their strength, their warriors, their laws. What would it mean for a human to step into their world, defeat their greatest warrior, and claim their queen as a prize. It would change everything. It would shatter the ancient hierarchy. No Zethari could ever again look at their warriors or their laws in the same way. Lysara felt the weight of this truth settling over her like a storm cloud. She tried to calm herself, but the feeling of unease only deepened. Her fingers tingled as though some invisible force was pressing against her, pushing her closer to a precipice she was not sure she could climb back from. In her mind, 1,000 thoughts collided. Would she allow it? Would she defy the law, disavow the ancient rules, and try to hold on to her crown, her authority? But what choice did she have? If Roderick defeated Caliph, the law would demand she'll submit. She could not escape the truth of the Zethari law once the champion was bested. The victor had the right to claim whatever they wished, and now Roderick would claim her. Lysara stood, the cold realization hitting her like a physical blow. The eyes of the arena were on her, waiting, expecting a reaction. She tried to steady herself, to regain control, but the uncertainty still gripped her. It was no longer just a battle for victory or defeat. It was a fight for her very freedom. She was no longer just the queen of the Zethari. She was a pawn in a game that had just begun. The ground trembled as Roderick delivered another powerful blow, one that left Caliph stumbling backward, his massive body faltering for the first time in the battle. The crowd held its breath, the tension palpable in the air. Lysara's eyes narrowed. She braced herself for what was to come. It was only a matter of time now. The arena was deathly quiet as Caliph fell to his knees, the weight of defeat settling upon him like a crushing weight. His massive body trembled, and the sharp hissing breath that escaped his lips only emphasized the once unimaginable truth. He had been bested by a human. Roderick stood a few feet away, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of his breathing. His sword was still raised, the tip of the blade barely grazing the ground. His gaze, though intense, was not triumphant. There was no boast, no celebration in his eyes. He had come to do what he had promised, to fight, to win, and now he awaited what came next. The silence was broken only by the sound of Caliph's labored breathing. Slowly, the mighty alien champion's gaze met Roderick's, and for the first time, there was no hatred in Caliph's eyes, only resignation. Roderick didn't move. He didn't need to. The law was clear now. The fight was over, and the victor's prize awaited him. Lysara's eyes never left Roderick as she watched him stand victorious over Caliph. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from something deeper. Something she couldn't quite place. She felt as though the entire foundation of her world had shifted. For so long she had ruled with authority, with the knowledge that her people would never falter in their strength. But here was this human, this outsider, who had toppled her greatest warrior without breaking a sweat. For the first time, Lysara felt her throne slip away from her grasp. A ripple of murmurs broke out from the crowd. The Zethari were not accustomed to such a turn of events. The laws had been clear, but this was something no one had seen coming. The warriors, the officials, the spectators, none of them knew how to react. This was uncharted territory. Lysara stood up, her robes flowing around her as she descended from the throne. Her every movement was precise, measured, but there was an edge to her steps now. The moment had come. She had no choice. The law demanded it. The air in the arena felt thicker now, the gravity of what had just happened settling like a storm cloud. As she approached Roderick, she could feel the weight of the moment. She had never imagined herself in this position, standing before a human who was not only her conqueror in combat, but by the ancient law of the Zethari, her new master. Roderick turned to face her. His expression had softened, but his eyes still held that quiet, unshakable determination. There was no arrogance in his stance, no mocking smile. He was a man of his word, a man who had come here to win and had done so. He was not here to take her down, but simply to fulfill a law older than the stars themselves. "I suppose we both know what happens next," Roderick said, his voice steady, but filled with an unspoken understanding. He didn't need to say it aloud. The law had already decreed it. Lysara's chest tightened. The feeling of helplessness gnawed at her, but she couldn't show it. She was a queen, and queens did not show weakness, not even now when her power was slipping through her fingers like sand. Her lips parted, and for a brief moment, the weight of the law seemed to lift from her shoulders. She took a step forward, but her voice caught in her throat. How could she address this? How could she speak to the man who had just taken her freedom? You know the law, Lysara said, her voice echoing through the silent arena. Victor has the right to claim what they desire, but know this. There is no pride in taking the throne of a queen. Her words were heavy with the truth of their situation, but there was a vulnerability in them too. She was queen no longer, not in the way she had once been. Roderick had not just won her as a prize, it had shaken her very foundation. It forced her to confront the fragility of her rule, and it hurt more than she cared to admit. Roderick bowed his head slightly, acknowledging her words without replying. He didn't need to speak. The ancient law did not demand a discussion, nor did it allow for second thoughts. He had won, and now everything was his. Lysara's thoughts raced. She had spent her entire life fighting for control, for the right to rule, and yet here she stood, relinquishing it all to a human. This was not how she had imagined it. She had thought her reign would end by her own terms, by her own hand. It's not because of a law, and not because of a human's victory. Come with me, Roderick said, his voice softer now. You and your people will find a place in my world. Under my protection. I won't force you to bow before me, but the law has spoken. We must both live with it. Lysara stood still for a moment, her gaze locked on him. His words held no malice. He did not speak of conquest or dominance. In some ways, it was more humiliating than any battle she had fought the way Roderick treated her, as if this were all just part of a bigger plan. A plan she had no say in. The queen's thoughts wavered between anger and acceptance. How had this human, this outsider, come to possess the strength to change everything she had ever known? She stepped forward, her steps slow and deliberate, and without another word, she followed him. Her position, her pride, her throne, all of it was gone. In that moment, she knew her life would never be the same. The palace was eerily quiet as Lysara walked the halls of her once immense home. The sound of her footsteps echoed off the stone walls, each step reminding her of what she had lost. Her crown, once so weighty with pride and power, now felt like a distant memory. It had only been hours since the battle, yet in that time, the entire foundation of her world had been torn asunder. Lysara had never imagined she would be here walking through the halls of her own palace, no longer a queen, but a subject. Every turn she made in the palace, once familiar and full of comfort, now felt foreign. The walls, the tapestries, even the air around her, all seemed to remind her that she no longer ruled. She was now bound by a law older than her people, a law that had stripped her of the only identity she had ever known. She could still feel the weight of Roderick's eyes upon her as they left the arena. His gaze had been steady, unwavering. He had not treated her like a prize to be claimed, not in the way she had expected. He had treated her with an odd kind of respect, as if he were not conquering her, but simply fulfilling a task. Lysara paused in front of a large mirror that stood in the hallway, its surface reflecting her royal attire, now devoid of meaning. The rich fabrics that once symbolized her authority now seemed to hang loosely, like a reminder of a life she could no longer return to. Her own reflection stared back at her, and for the first time in her life, she didn't recognize the woman. Looking back, the queen who had ruled with iron authority was gone. In her place was someone unfamiliar, someone who had been forced to submit to a human, a warrior from another world. How had she allowed this to happen? How had she allowed a mere human to claim her throne, her pride, her freedom?
The thoughts
Spiraled through her mind like a whirlwind, and no matter how hard she tried to push them aside, they kept coming back. The heavy door to her chambers creaked open, and Lysara turned sharply to see Roderick standing in the doorway. He was not in his battle armor anymore. Instead, he wore simple, comfortable clothing, his eyes calm and unreadable. As always, it was as though the victory, the shifting of power, didn't affect him at all. His expression was steady, But there was an undercurrent of something else in his gaze, something that made Lysara feel more vulnerable than she had ever felt in her life. Roderick stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his presence filling the room. Lysara's instincts flared up, but there was nothing she could do now. Allah had already spoken. "Your chambers have been prepared, Lysara," he said, his voice as neutral as always. "Everything is in order." Lysara swallowed, her throat tight. She wanted to retort, to say something that would put him in his place, to remind him that she was still a queen, that she had the power to lead her people even if she wasn't technically on the throne. But the words caught in her throat. She had no power anymore. She was just another subject in his world now. "Is that all?" Lysara's voice was quieter than she intended, the bitterness slipping out before she could stop it. Roderick didn't flinch. "You are free to move as you wish, but you know the law. You are mine now, Lysara. There is no escaping that." His words were blunt, but there was no cruelty in them, just a calm acceptance of what had transpired. The queen's chest tightened. The finality in his voice was undeniable. The truth of it felt like a weight pressing down on her. The Wands mighty, queen of the Zethari, reduced to this. A subject, a concubine bound to a human warrior by an ancient law she couldn't defy. "Why?" Zara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Wasn't sure what she was asking. Why had he fought so fiercely to win? Why had he come here too? Claim her, or why, after all this, he still treated her with this odd sense of respect? But she needed to know. She needed some shred of understanding, some piece of the puzzle she could hold on to. Roderick's expression softened just a fraction. For the first time, he stepped closer, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that left her breathless. "'Cause it is what the law demands," he said, his tone gentle. "I came here to fight for what was rightfully mine, and I won. But I don't wish to break you, Lysara. I never did." Lysara felt her breath hitch in her throat. She wasn't sure what to make of his words. He was offering her no resistance, no defiance. Instead, he was treating her as though she were an equal, fellow participant in some game neither of them had chosen to play. The walls of her palace felt like they were closing in on her. The grand, imposing structure was no longer a symbol of her rule, but a reminder of her loss. Roderick's presence only intensified the feeling, yet something in her fought against the feeling of surrender. "You may have won the battle, Roderick," Lysara said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "But you cannot control me. I will never be yours in the way you think, not completely." Roderick met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. "I don't expect you to bend to my will, Lysara. I only ask that you accept what has happened. The law is the law, but the rest, that we can work out together." There was a silence between them, heavy with meaning. Lysara wasn't sure what to say, or if there was anything left to say. The struggle within her was far from over. She had lost everything in a single day, but her heart still clung to the remnants of her pride, to the memory of a life she couldn't simply let go of. Roderick turned to leave, but before he did, he glanced back at her. "You are not my prisoner, Lysara. You are free to make your own choices. But in this, you are bound by the law. And that is something I cannot change." As the door closed softly behind him, Lysara stood alone, feeling more torn than ever before. The battle was over, but her war had just begun. Lysara sat on the edge of her bed, the weight of the silk sheets beneath her doing little to ease the pressure in her chest. No, she had always prided herself on her strength, her unyielding will, but now that strength seemed almost laughable. The grand opulent palace that had once been the symbol of her reign now felt like a gilded cage. She was trapped within it. Roderick's words lingered in her mind, echoing through her thoughts like a constant hum. "You are not my prisoner. You are free to make your own choices." His voice was calm, even kind, as though offering her a kindness she had never expected from someone who had just claimed her as his prize. But she could feel the truth of his words. Deep inside her, she was free, in one sense, yet shackled by a law that demanded submission. What kind of power was this? To be both free and bound. To be a queen, yet not have the power to command her own fate? Lysara had spent her life commanding armies, making choices that affected entire worlds. Never once second-guessing herself. But now, everything was different. She had been reduced to this, a subject of a human warrior. Her freedom bound by the very law that had once empowered her people. There was no way around it. She stood and walked to the window, pushing the heavy drapes aside. The view was breathtaking. As it always had been, a vast expanse of open land, the horizon stretching out endlessly before her. But it felt distant, disconnected. As though the world outside had no relevance to her anymore, her gaze drifted toward the distant hills, where the sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, a reminder of the passing of time, of a world that continued to turn even as she found herself frozen in place. Her thoughts wandered back to the arena, to the moment when Roderick had won. She could still see Caliph, her champion, crumpling to the ground, his massive body defeated by a single, decisive strike. The moment had been surreal, as if time itself had warped. And Roderick, he had stood there, unshaken, eyes calm, as though he had simply done what was expected of him. Lasara had expected to feel anger, humiliation, perhaps even rage. But instead there had been an odd sense of peace. It was as though the weight of her crown had been lifted. And for the first time in her life, she was no longer responsible for the fate of her people. But that peace was fleeting, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it had been a lie. Peace was a luxury she couldn't afford. The truth was harder to swallow. She was no longer in control. And the reality of it sat like a stone in her stomach. She had been forced to accept Roderick's victory, forced to accept the law, forced to accept the fact that she was now bound to him. As she stood by the window, her thoughts drifted to what had happened since the battle. Roderick had not been cruel. He had not treated her as a prisoner, but he had not treated her as a queen, either. He was offering her something else, a choice, a different kind of power. The kind of power that didn't come from force or domination, but from trust, from partnership. And yet, Lasara wasn't sure how to wield it. Could she trust him? Could she accept this new role, this new life? Every part of her resisted. Every part of her screamed that she should fight, that she should reclaim her throne, her authority. But the law was clear. There was no going back. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts, and before she could respond, the door creaked open. It was Roderick, standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I thought you might want to walk the gardens," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of warmth. "The evening air is cool. It might help." Lasara turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. There was no anger in his gaze, no arrogance, only quiet understanding. She wanted to push him away, to tell him that she didn't need his pity or his kindness, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded slightly. "I suppose I could use the air," she said, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. Roderick didn't speak as they walked through the halls, his presence at once commanding and strangely comforting. The gardens were not the sprawling beauty they had once been. Many of the flowers had withered in the absence of the queen's care, but there was still something calming about the space. The crisp evening breeze carried the scent of earth, and foliage and the sound of the wind through the trees was the only noise, the only company. Lasara breathed in deeply, closing her eyes for a moment. She hadn't realized how tightly she had been holding herself, how much tension had built up inside her. The air was soothing, and for a brief moment, she could almost forget that she was no longer a queen, that she had no power. But that was the truth, wasn't it? She was no longer who she had been. Power! Her power had been replaced by something else. Submission. But not the kind of submission that broke a person. This was different. This was a submission born from acceptance, from the understanding that there was strength in yielding, in letting go. Roderick turned to her, his gaze steady. "You don't have to fight, Lasara," he said, his voice low, but clear. "You don't have to be the queen anymore. You can just be you, whatever that means now." Lasara didn't respond right away. Instead, she simply looked at him. The power of submission, the power of surrender, was not a weakness. She realized now that it was a different kind of strength, one that she had never truly understood. It was the power to choose, to release, and to trust. And for the first time, Lysara felt something stirred deep within her. It wasn't hope. Not exactly, but it was a possibility. Possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a life after the throne. A life she could still shape, in ways she had never imagined before. The days that followed were a blur of shifting roles and changing expectations. Lysara had always prided herself on her control, on her ability to shape the world around her. Now, the world was shaping her, pushing her toward a future she had never imagined. It was a strange kind of freedom, a freedom wrapped in uncertainty, but also an opportunity. The Zethri Palace, once a symbol of her absolute rule, was now a place of quiet reflection. Gone were the grand ceremonies, the elaborate feasts, the council meetings with the most powerful beings of the galaxy. All of that had been replaced by something much simpler, yet much more profound. She was no longer queen, but she was not powerless either. Lysara had come to accept her new position with a kind of quiet resignation. She had learned that submission did not equal weakness. It was a surrender to the unknown, a stepping back, to allow something new to emerge. And something had indeed emerged in her, something she hadn't realized was there, a new strength. A strength that came not from commanding armies, but from trusting someone else with her future. The mornings were the hardest. Waking up in the massive, empty bed that once belonged to the queen was a reminder of everything she had lost. But it was also a reminder of what she had gained. She could feel the power within her growing. Not in the way it once did when she ruled her people, but in a quieter, more personal way. It was a power that came from choice, from understanding her own desires and fears. Roderick had kept his word. He had not sought to dominate her, nor had he treated her as a mere possession. Instead, he treated her as an equal, as a partner in a world that neither of them fully understood. It was an odd arrangement, but one that slowly began to make sense. They had both been thrown into a position neither had chosen, yet neither was unwilling to adapt. One evening, as Lysara walked through the palace gardens now tended by the Zethri in service to Roderick, she found herself reflecting on the strange turn her life had taken. The garden, once a place where she sought solitude, was now a place where she found clarity. The flowers bloomed more vibrantly than ever, their colors bold and unapologetic, was a metaphor for her own journey. She had bloomed too, but not in the way she had ever expected. As she walked, she heard footsteps behind her. Roderick approached, his presence steady and familiar. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone brought her comfort. But still, he did speak, his voice low, yet filled with a warmth she hadn't anticipated. "You've been quiet lately," he said, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Are you ready to speak your mind?" Lysara stopped walking and turned to face him. Her eyes met his, and for the first time in days, she felt no hesitation. There was a calm in her heart now, a peace that had eluded her for so long. "I think I understand now," she said softly, her voice steady. "The power I had before, it was never really mine. It was borrowed, enforced by the laws of my people, by tradition. But this..." She paused, the words catching in her throat for a moment, before she found the courage to continue. "This is different. This power I have now, it's mine to choose, it's mine to shape." Roderick's smile widened slightly. "I never intended to take your power, Lysara. I only wanted to give you the freedom to discover it for yourself." Lysara felt something stir inside her, a spark of understanding, of realization. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel burdened by the weight of responsibility. She no longer had to carry the entire galaxy on her shoulders. She could simply be, and that in itself was powerful. The new order was one of balance, not dominance. Lysara no longer needed to be the queen to feel valuable. She no longer needed to define herself by the title that had once been her identity. She was more than that now. She was a woman with choices, with the freedom to shape her own life in whatever direction she wished. And in this new life, she had a partner. Not a conqueror, but someone who respected her, who saw her as an equal. Roderick had shown her that submission wasn't about losing oneself. It was about gaining the freedom to choose what mattered most. I never thought I would say this, Lysara continued, her voice more certain now. But I think I'm starting to understand what true strength is. It's not in the throne, or in the armies, or in the laws that bind us. It's in our ability to choose who we want to be, no matter what the world expects of us. Roderick stepped closer, his expression softening as he reached out to gently touch her arm. And let's make that choice together. Lysara met his gaze, and for the first time she saw the future not as something to be feared, but as something to be embraced. It was not an easy road ahead, but it was theirs to walk, side by side. The world they would create together would be one built on mutual respect, trust, and the freedom to choose their own path. The new order was not a simple exchange of power. It was an evolution of both their lives, their worlds, and of what they had once thought was possible. And in that moment, Lysara knew that whatever came next, she would be ready.